The sentinel at the Tomb of the Unknowns remained perfectly still. But when President Obama offered a handshake, he spoke 8 words that shattered the silence and brought the former commander-in-chief to his knees. What he said was unbelievable. The late October air over Arlington, Virginia, was crisp and achingly clear, the kind of autumn day that felt like a held breath. The sky was a high, brilliant blue, a stark canvas for the blazing gold and crimson of the maples scattered between the endless, silent rows of white headstones. There was no London drizzle here, no wet wool sky. There was only a solemn beauty and the weight of a nation's memory, carried on a breeze that rustled the fallen leaves across the manicured lawns. Barack Obama moved through this hallowed ground with a quiet purpose that bordered on reverence. This was not an official visit. There was no press pool trailing his every step, no carefully staged photo opportunities, no motorcade waiting with engines humming. There was only a former president in a dark charcoal overcoat, his security detail maintaining a respectful, almost invisible perimeter. They were close enough to do their job, but far enough to let the man breathe the sanctified air alone. Agent Anya Sharma, his lead protection officer, murmured into her sleeve microphone, her voice a low whisper that was swallowed by the immense quiet. Raven is proceeding on foot toward the amphitheater. Timeline is fluid. Atmosphere is calm. Copy that, Sharma, the reply came, distant and tinny. No anomalies. But there was an anomaly, though it wasn't a threat. It was in the man's posture. This wasn't the confident stride of a world leader or the relaxed gait of a tourist. Obama walked like a man carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the office he once held. It was a more personal burden, the kind that settles in the soul years after the crowds have gone home and the noise has faded. In the pocket of his overcoat, his fingers absently traced the milled edge of a small, heavy object, a presidential challenge coin. He hadn't planned on bringing it, but he'd found it on his desk before leaving, a relic of a former life that suddenly felt relevant again. His path was taking him toward the Tomb of the Unknowns, that marble shrine to anonymity and ultimate sacrifice. As he approached, the rhythmic, percussive sound of steel-tapped heels on stone grew louder. Click-clack, click-clack. 21 steps. The sound of perfect discipline. A small crowd of visitors stood behind a velvet rope, their voices naturally hushed. Among them was a man named Mr. Harrison, a high school history teacher from Pennsylvania, trying to instill the meaning of this place in his dozen students. "Look there," he said softly, pointing toward the marching sentinel. "That's a soldier from the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment. The Old Guard. They are the keepers of the tomb. They volunteer for this. It's one of the highest honors." A student named Maya, clutching a notebook, whispered, "Why 21 steps, Mr. Harrison?" "It alludes to the 21-gun salute, Maya. The highest military honor. Everything they do here is symbolic. Every gesture, every second of silence, is packed with meaning." A few feet away from the school group, an elderly man stood alone, his back ramrod straight. He wore a simple windbreaker, but a faded black cap on his head read, "Vietnam Veteran." He wasn't watching the sentinel with the awe of a tourist, he was watching with the quiet, knowing gaze of a man who understood the cost of what the tomb represented. He saw the polished M14 rifle, the pristine dress blues, the focused emptiness in the sentinel's eyes, and he knew. Obama's attention, however, was now fixed entirely on that lone, marching figure. Sergeant Leo Vance. 27 years old, from a small town in Ohio. 2 tours in Kandahar. And now, utterly motionless in his duty, a living monument of flesh and bone. The precision was breathtaking. The turn, the placing of the rifle, the seamless transition from movement to stillness, it was a performance of such profound respect that it was almost painful to watch. Something in the sentinel's bearing captivated Obama. It wasn't just the ceremony, it was the man inside it. He could see a stillness that went beyond training, a dedication that felt almost monastic. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of countless service members, but here, in this sacred silence, it felt different. More potent. He found his feet stopping. The plan had been to watch from a distance, pay his respects quietly, and leave. But he felt an undeniable pull, a need to get closer. Agent Sharma saw the deviation instantly. Raven is stationary. He's observing the Sentinel. He's changing course. Moving toward the cordon. A flicker of concern in her partner's voice. Cause for concern? Negative, Sharma replied, watching her principal's face. Looks like he just wants to connect. You know how he is around the military. Standard protocols. Let him lead. Obama approached the rope line, his eyes never leaving the soldier. The Vietnam veteran glanced over, recognized the former president, and gave a slow, subtle nod of acknowledgement, man to man. Obama returned it. He stood there for a long moment, watching the flawless ritual. 21 seconds of silence. The turn. The transfer of the rifle. 21 more steps. He wasn't just watching a soldier. He was watching a symbol. And in that moment, he decided he had to do more than just watch. He had to honor it. Ignoring the gentle psychological barrier of the rope, he ducked under it and began walking directly toward the Sentinel's path. The quiet gasps from the crowd were audible. Mr. Harrison put a warning hand on his student's shoulders. Agent Sharma tensed. Raven is crossing the cordon. Approaching the Sentinel. This was not part of any plan. This was something else entirely. The world seemed to shrink to the 50 feet of black matting where Sergeant Leo Vance executed his flawless patrol. As Obama approached, the air grew thick with unspoken rules and the crushing weight of tradition. The sentinels of the tomb are famously, inviolably silent. They don't react to weather, to noise, to people. They are a constant, a human anchor in a sea of memory. For a former president to approach one during their guard mount was an unprecedented breach of etiquette. Vance saw him coming, of course. His peripheral vision, honed by years of training and combat awareness, registered the tall figure in the dark overcoat. He registered the gasp from the crowd, the sudden tension in the air. But his face remained a mask of impassive focus. His jaw was set. His gaze was fixed on the middle distance. The former commander-in-chief might as well have been a ghost. Inside that disciplined vessel, however, a hurricane was raging. 3 hours earlier, standing in the barracks, Leo had taken a call from his older sister, Sarah, back in Ohio. Her voice, usually so steady, was frayed with tears. "Leo, you're not going to believe this," she'd sobbed. "I was cleaning out Dad's workshop, you know, finally getting to it." "Yeah, Sarah. Take your time with it," he'd said gently, his heart aching for her. Their father, Thomas Vance, a factory worker who'd spent 40 years on an assembly line, had died of lung cancer in the spring. The grief was still a raw, open wound for both of them. "I found something." Tucked inside his old toolbox, under a bunch of rusted wrenches. "A letter, Leo." He wrote a letter. "A letter? To who?" Sarah's breath hitched. "To President Obama. He wrote a 3-page letter to the President of the United States and never sent it." Leo had gone completely silent, the polished floor of the barracks seeming to drop out from under him. His father, a man of few words who believed actions spoke louder, had written a letter. To a president. What did it say? "Oh, Leo," she'd wept. "It was about you. About how proud he was of you, standing guard at that sacred place. And it was about his speeches. He wrote that when the pain got bad, he'd listen to that one speech on an old cassette player, the one from Cairo. He said it reminded him that a working man's dignity was still worth something in the world." That memory was now screaming in Leo's mind as the subject of that letter, the man his father had written to, stopped 3 feet in front of him. The scent of a clean, expensive wool coat mixed with the crisp autumn air. "A beautiful day to stand watch," Obama said. His voice was quiet, conversational, yet it carried the unmistakable resonance of the most famous baritone in the world. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Protocol was absolute. No response. No acknowledgement. Eyes forward. His grip on the M14 rifle was the only thing grounding him. Obama didn't seem deterred by the silence. He was a man who had mastered the art of reading it. He'd spent 8 years in rooms where the unspoken was more important than the spoken. He saw the microscopic tension in the soldier's jaw, the fractional change in his breathing pattern. This wasn't the blankness of a robot, this was the ferocious control of a man holding back an ocean. "I've met thousands of soldiers," Obama continued, his own breath misting in the cool air. "Shook their hands, thanked them for their service. The usual things. But I always wondered about the ones I couldn't thank. The ones standing a post in the dead of night, guarding a base in some forgotten corner of the world. The ones like you." Behind them, Mr. Harrison's student, Lucas, a boy with more curiosity than patience, whispered loudly, "Why isn't he talking back?" "Because it's his duty, Lucas," the teacher murmured, his eyes wide with the gravity of the moment. "His discipline is his respect. To remain silent, especially now, is the hardest and most important part of his job." Obama looked at the Sentinel's decorations, the ribbons on his chest that told a story of service and sacrifice in faraway lands. Then his eyes settled on the soldiers' hands, gloved in pristine white. He saw the strength in them, the way they held the rifle not as a prop, but as an extension of himself. "Your father was military, wasn't he?" The question was a precision strike. It landed with the force of a physical blow. Leo's disciplined composure almost cracked. His grip on the rifle tightened just enough that the leather of the sling creaked. It was a tiny, infinitesimal sound, lost to the crowd, but to Obama, standing just feet away, it was as loud as a shout. He'd seen that tell before, the involuntary physical response to a deeply buried truth. He knew he was right. He pressed gently. "I can see it in how you carry yourself," Obama said, his voice dropping even lower, creating a small, intimate space between them in the vastness of the cemetery. "It's not just the training they give you here. It's deeper. Learned at home. A legacy." The Vietnam veteran behind the rope took off his cap, holding it against his chest. He knew exactly what he was seeing. This wasn't a president and a soldier. This was one man recognizing the history inside another. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that something was about to happen that had never happened here before. The moment hung in the air, stretched taut between protocol and humanity. Sergeant Vance remained a statue of discipline, but Obama could feel the silent battle raging within him. The former president reached into his overcoat pocket and his fingers closed around the familiar weight of the challenge coin. He pulled it out, letting it rest in the palm of his gloved hand. The bronze gleamed in the sharp autumn sun, the presidential seal a beacon of authority and respect. "I've given out maybe 30 of these in my entire presidency," Obama said, his voice resonating with a quiet intensity. He wasn't speaking to the crowd, or to history, but only to the man in front of him. Always to someone who went so far above and beyond, it left me speechless. A SEAL who took a bullet for his teammate. A medic who ran into enemy fire. People who performed some extraordinary act of courage. He paused, letting his words settle. He looked from the coin in his hand to the unwavering gaze of the Sentinel. "But standing here, looking at you, I'm thinking maybe I had the definition of extraordinary wrong." Vance's breathing hitched. It was almost imperceptible, a slight shudder in his perfectly composed chest. Obama caught it. "Maybe the real courage isn't just in those dramatic, split-second moments," Obama continued, his voice a near whisper. "Maybe the real courage is this. Standing here. Day after day. In the heat, in the snow. Being a constant. Being a symbol of something bigger than any one of us. Being the man who guards the memory of those who can't speak for themselves. That takes a different kind of strength. A deeper kind." Agent Sharma watched, her professional instincts screaming that this had gone on too long, that this was a breach of security norms. But her human instincts told her to stay put, to guard the space, to let this sacred moment unfold. Command, she whispered into her mic, duration extending. Raven is having a moment. Copy, Sharma, the voice came back, imbued with a new understanding. Let him be human. Obama took a half-step forward, closing the distance just enough to extend his hand. The coin lay in his open palm like an offering. I keep this for special occasions. But I can't think of a more special or deserving occasion than this. The crowd was utterly silent. Phones were out, recording, but the atmosphere had shifted from tourism to reverent witness. Mr. Harrison had his arm around Lucas's shoulder, both of them transfixed. The Vietnam veteran stood as if at attention. Vance did not move. He couldn't. His training, his oath, the eyes of his commanding officers who might see this later, it was all a cage of iron around him. But his eyes, for the first time, flickered down to the coin, then back up to meet Obama's. And in that fleeting glance, Obama saw it all, the grief, the pride, the turmoil, the son who missed his dad. Take your time, Obama said softly, his hand remaining steady. I'm not going anywhere. And then, impossibly, Leo Vance moved. It wasn't a sudden or sloppy gesture. It was a movement of immense, controlled deliberation. His right hand, which had been secured at his side, released its position with military precision. It traveled forward, slow and steady, bridging the chasm between duty and emotion. The pristine white glove, a symbol of his ceremonial perfection, reached out to accept the offering. The gasp from the crowd was sharp and collective. Mr. Harrison instinctively pulled his students closer, as if to impress the impossible gravity of the scene upon them. Their hands met. Obama felt the strong, steady calluses of a soldier's grip, even through the gloves. Vance felt the warmth and the weight of the coin, a tangible link to the man his father had so admired. It wasn't political theater. It was real. As Vance's fingers closed around the coin, he pulled his hand back and resumed his position. But the spell of silence was broken. The dam of protocol had been breached. His eyes, clear and direct, met the former president's. And then he spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of unspoken things. My father died this spring, sir. The polite interest in Obama's face vanished, replaced instantly by a deep, resonant empathy. This was a language he knew well, the dialect of grief. I'm so very sorry for your loss, he said, and the words were not a platitude. They carried the weight of a man who had comforted thousands of Gold Star families. What was his name? Thomas. Thomas Arthur Vance, sir. He worked the line at a factory in Ohio for 40 years. The first crack in the Sentinel's armor had appeared. But the flood was yet to come. A working man, Obama said, a slow nod of profound respect. The words hung in the air, a simple epitaph full of meaning. Yes, sir. A working man, Vance confirmed, his voice gaining a quiet strength, as if speaking his father's truth aloud gave him permission. He never asked for much. Believed in a day's work for a day's pay. But he believed in things, you know. Big things. He believed dignity wasn't just for the powerful. He believed words could change how a person saw themselves in the mirror. Sounds like my kind of man, Obama said, his gaze softening. Tell me about him. Vance hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He was on duty. He had broken protocol. But he looked into the eyes of the former president and saw not a politician, but a man who was genuinely listening. He made a decision. He had cancer, sir. Lung cancer, from the factory, probably. The last few months, he couldn't get around much. The medication, it took his voice. But he could listen. What did he listen to? Obama asked gently. Here it was. The heart of it all. He had this old cassette player. A cheap plastic thing from the 90s, older than me. One speaker, all crackly. And he had one tape he made my sister play for him. Every single day. Toward the end, it was all he wanted. Obama's hands, which had been clasped loosely, went completely still. He felt a strange premonition, a sense that the world was about to pivot on its axis. "Your Cairo speech, sir," Vance said. June, 2009. The one about a new beginning. The former president blinked slowly, the memory of that day flooding back, the heat, the crowd at the university, the immense pressure to get the words right. The one about finding common ground, mutual respect. "That's the one, sir." My sister said he wore out 2 copies of that tape. He'd listened to it for hours. Vance's jaw tightened, the only outward sign of the powerful emotion he was wrestling into submission. He said you were the only powerful man he'd ever heard talk about dignity like it was something every single person was born with, not just something you get if you're rich or educated. Behind them, Maya, the student with the notebook, was furiously scribbling. Mr. Harrison wasn't teaching anymore, he was learning. He was witnessing a lesson more profound than any textbook could offer. "Which part?" Obama asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Which part did he listen to the most?" "The part where you said that every person, no matter their station in life, carries something sacred inside of them. And the part about the dignity of work. How the people who build things and keep the world running might not have their names in history books, but their labor is a foundation of our society." Obama's eyes widened slightly. A ghost of a memory. "I remember writing that line. I was up half the night with John, my speechwriter. We wanted it to land just right." "Well, sir," Vance's voice cracked for the first time. "It landed. For him, it landed every single day. He'd make my sister rewind it and play it over and over. He said it was the first time he'd heard a leader talk about his life, a factory worker's life, like it mattered. Like it was noble." The small crowd had grown, drawn by the impossible sight of the Sentinel in conversation. But a bubble of sacred silence remained around the 2 men. This moment was theirs. "There's something else," Vance said, his voice dropping even lower. "Something I wasn't sure I should say." Obama waited, his entire being focused on the young soldier. "My sister, when she was cleaning out his workshop this morning, she found a letter. Dad wrote it to you, sir. Never sent it. Just tucked it away." "A letter? To me?" "3 pages, sir. In his careful handwriting, the kind he used for important things. He wrote about how your words helped him through the worst days. How that speech made him feel like he still counted as a man, even when the cancer was taking everything else from him." Obama's breathing had gone shallow. His public face, the one trained for cameras and crises, was gone. All that was left was the man. "What else did he say, Sergeant?" "He wrote about me, sir." Vance's gaze was direct, unwavering, but his eyes were now glistening. "He wrote about how proud he was that his son stood guard for presidents and kings, though he never met one. And he wrote, he hoped that someone would tell you one day. That your words about dignity, that they lived on. In places you'd never see, in people you'd never meet." "Oh my God," Obama whispered, the words escaping him like a prayer. "But this is the part, sir. The part that made my sister call me, sobbing. The last line of the letter. He wrote," Vance took a shaky breath. "He wrote, perhaps one day, you'll meet my Leo. Perhaps you'll see what your words helped create." That was it. That was the moment Barack Obama's composure finally, irrevocably, shattered. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes filled, not with a few polite tears, but with a deep, welling grief and astonishment. The invisible shield he had carried for 8 years in the White House, the one that deflected blows and absorbed crises, simply disintegrated. A leader's words, spoken years ago to a crowd of thousands, had crossed oceans and continents to become a dying man's private comfort in a small house in Ohio. And now, that man's last wish had been delivered, by a miracle of timing and coincidence, right here, on this hallowed ground. The silence that followed was more profound than the Sentinel's mandated stillness. It was a silence filled with the echo of a dead man's words, a father's hope delivered from beyond the grave. Obama stood frozen, the full, impossible weight of the moment pressing down on him. The world leader was gone, replaced by a son, a writer, a man stunned by the purest form of human connection he had ever experienced. Sergeant Vance, seeing the effect of his words, held his ground, his own tears now tracing silent paths down his stoic cheeks. He had delivered his father's message. His duty, in that moment, felt complete. "There's one more thing," he wrote, "Sir," Vance said, his voice thick but steady. "The very last line. After the part about hoping you'd meet me." Obama, still fighting for composure, could only nod, his eyes locked on the young man's face. He wrote, "And if you do meet him, tell my boy his old man was right. Tell him dignity isn't what people give you. It's what you refuse to let them take away." That was the final blow. The simple, powerful wisdom of a factory worker from Ohio reached across time and space and broke the former president's heart. Barack Obama pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes, his broad shoulders shaking with a single, deep sob. It was not a performance. It was a complete, raw, and involuntary surrender to the overwhelming beauty and sorrow of the moment. Agent Sharma took a half-step forward, her protective instincts firing, but stopped herself. She was no longer guarding a VIP. She was standing guard over a man's soul. The Vietnam veteran quietly wiped his own eyes with the back of his hand. He'd seen men break before, but never like this. Not from a wound, but from a grace. When Obama finally lowered his hands, his face was streaked with tears. He looked at Vance, his expression one of profound gratitude. "Consider it delivered, Sergeant," he said, his voice hoarse. Message delivered. He then did something that broke every remaining shred of protocol. He stepped forward, crossing the final invisible line, and extended his hand. This was not for a coin or a photo. This was for connection. Vance shifted his rifle to his left hand with practiced ease and met the handshake. Their grip was firm, an unspoken contract of shared understanding. "I wish I could have met him," Obama said, his voice still thick with emotion. "You did, sir," Vance replied softly. "Every time he played that tape. He used to say it was like having a conversation with an old friend." Obama nodded, taking a shaky breath to compose himself. He looked directly into Vance's eyes. "Your father was a wise man, Leo. And he raised a son who embodies every word he wrote." He stepped back, respecting the boundary he had so thoroughly crossed. He gave a final, sharp nod to the Sentinel. "Stand tall, Sergeant. You're carrying more than you know." With that, he turned and walked toward the tomb, his step steadier now than when he had arrived. The weight he carried had not vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer the amorphous burden of a legacy, it was the specific, sacred responsibility of having his words truly matter to one good man. Behind him, Sergeant Leo Vance seamlessly resumed his duty. His posture perfected itself. His gaze locked into the middle distance. He began his patrol. Click-clack, click-clack. 21 steps. But he was not the same man. The silence he kept was no longer just about duty, it was filled with the memory of his father's voice, a president's tears, and the heavy bronze coin that was now warm in his pocket. He was no longer just guarding the unknowns. He was guarding his father's definition of dignity. And in the quiet solitude of his post, he knew he would carry it for the rest of his life. As the black Suburban drove away from Arlington's quiet hills, Barack Obama sat in the back seat, the world outside a blur of autumn color. The raw emotion of the encounter had subsided, leaving in its wake a profound and energizing clarity. He had spent years crafting words, sending them out into the world, wondering where they landed, or if they landed at all. Today, he'd received a reply. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, past the numbers of world leaders and senators, until he found the one he wanted. John. It's Barack. There was a surprised pause on the other end. Mr. President. To what do I owe the honor? I know it's been a while. I need to ask you something. That Cairo speech, the 2009 one. Do you remember why we fought so hard for that passage about the dignity of the working man? He listened for a moment, a faint smile touching his lips. Yeah, I remember. I just met someone who made me realize we got it right. I just met a man who showed me why we do this work. Why every single word matters. He paused, watching the white marble of the Lincoln Memorial come into view. I'll call you later and tell you the story. Right now. I have some letters to write. 3 days later, a FedEx package arrived at a small house in a quiet Ohio town. Inside, Sarah Vance found a 2-page, handwritten letter on personal stationery. It was from the former president. He wrote of his profound honor in meeting her brother, and of the powerful impact her father's message had on him. He called her father a man of quiet nobility and profound wisdom, whose understanding of dignity was a lesson he would carry with him forever. Included with the letter was a formal request. With the family's permission, he would like to include a copy of Thomas Vance's letter in his presidential library, as a testament to the conversation that is always happening, often unheard, between citizens and their leaders. But that wasn't all. A month later, Sarah received another call, this time from a lawyer representing a private philanthropic fund. The caller explained that an anonymous donor had established a small, perpetual scholarship in her father's name. The Thomas Arthur Price Memorial Scholarship would provide annual assistance to the children of factory workers and tradesmen from their county who wished to pursue higher education or vocational training. The donation was quiet, with no fanfare, just a lasting echo of a moment in the autumn sun. Back at Arlington, 6 months later, Sergeant Leo Vance was promoted to corporal. During the ceremony, his commanding officer read from a letter of commendation that had arrived from Washington, citing Vance's exceptional dignity and composure under extraordinary circumstances. Vance never spoke of the conversation. Sentinels do not discuss their duties. It was a secret he kept locked away, as silent and sacred as the tomb itself. But every day, as he put on his uniform, his fingers would brush against the heavy, bronze coin he now kept in an inner pocket. And sometimes, when the light hit the marble of the tomb just right, he would remember the impossible afternoon when the silence was broken. He would hear his father's voice, mixed with the words of a president, telling him about dignity. Some conversations can change everything, even when they happen in whispers. And some silences, you learn, are meant to be broken. What would you have done? Would you have broken protocol for a moment like that? Do you believe a person's words can truly outlive them? Let us know in the comments below. And as we discuss this incredible moment, please always remember to comment with respect for the soldiers, the families, and the memory of those who served. If this story reminded you that humanity is more powerful than any uniform, hit that like button. If you want more true stories that reveal the heart behind the headlines, subscribe and ring that notification bell. And if someone you know needs to hear a story about dignity today, please share this video with them.